conflict. Every marriage has it, but how do you handle it well? On today's episode of the WinShape Marriage Podcast, we're diving into some of our most asked questions from our marriage retreats on conflict and communication. We'll be speaking with Eric Wooten, who is a marriage speaker and author, and diving deep into some tips and strategies to help couples navigate conflict well. It's going to be a great conversation, so let's go ahead and dive in. Eric Wooten, welcome to the WinShape Marriage Podcast. We're super excited to have you today.
Hey, good to be here.
Now, for those of our listeners that might not be familiar with who you are, could you share a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, that's probably all your listeners, huh? I'm internationally unknown, locally unrecognized, right? So, yeah, no, my name's Eric Wooten. Been married 31 years, was in pastoral ministry for about 15 years, and launched my own organization called Altered Marriage in 2020. And so I do retreats, counseling, workshops, have an online marriage membership, and so all things couples.
Awesome. Yeah, that's wonderful. And Eric, you're leading a retreat with us at WinShape here in the next few weeks, so super excited about that. And one of my favorite things about our marriage retreats is, most weekends we give couples the opportunity to submit Q&A questions for our speaker throughout the retreat. And so you get this really good pulse on some of the things that couples are walking through, either in communication or sex and intimacy, spiritual intimacy, all of that good stuff. And so it's always fun to go back through and say, okay, what are some great answers to those questions? And so what we've done today is compiled all of our questions that we've received from guests on communication. If you're up for it, I would love to run through the list and see what kind of response you can give.
Yeah, a little Q&A. Let's do it.
Yeah, awesome. So the first question I have here is, my spouse doesn't always communicate their feelings and can hold things back. How do I respectfully ask them to share their feelings in an argument?
That's good. Yeah, that's a tough one. It's like we already don't share feelings, and now we're asking them to share feelings in one of the most difficult moments, right? So the funny thing with Q&A is always we don't have the full context.
Not at all.
So it's hard to know exactly like why don't they share feelings? Is it the environment's doesn't reward it, or is it this person just doesn't know how? But I think just generally when people struggle to express things, oftentimes I just find that the environment's everything. Do we have, and this theme will probably come up throughout all these questions, but do we have a regular time and place where we sit down weekly or at least consistently to try to talk about some of our conflicts and concerns so that we know it's coming? Because a lot of times, this could be, well, one spouse ambushes the other, 30 minutes before bedtime. And so it's like, well, I'm not very good at expressing stuff. And so I think one, how do you create an environment that kind of rewards the sharing of feelings? If you're hypercritical, they're probably not going to want to share their feelings.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of times it's environment. And then if that's not working, the next place I'd go is probably just skill set. Can they even identify it, right? In the counseling office, we have like the feelings wheel, if you've ever seen those, right?
Yeah.
And so some people just they need something like that so they can point to it because they don't know how to make it up themselves. So it could be a variety of those things, but I think starting with let's find a time where we try it and then go from there.
Yeah, and I think you make an important point on the context, because like you were saying, we don't have the context of this whole question, but like you were saying, I mean, if the only time that you're talking about your emotions and your feelings are during intense conflict, then it makes sense that that's not going to be an environment that's conducive of wanting to share your emotions and feelings because it feels really intense. And so I love your point of just having like a regular rhythm where it doesn't have to feel so heated, and you can just have this like weekly touch point, whether it's like a Sunday afternoon or whatever it may be, just to sit down and say, hey, how are we feeling this week? And that kind of frees up a lot of the pressure to say like, hey, in the middle of an argument, now I have to turn it on and say like, this is actually how I'm feeling. And
or even the daily, right? The share your high and low for the day.
Yeah.
Where you get into the habit of when it's not intense, well, how did I feel today? and what was a good moment and what was a bad moment. So
Yeah.
because otherwise you're asking somebody that may not be able to do a somersault to like do Olympic level gymnastics in the midst of conflict, and
Yeah.
probably not going to go well.
And I love the idea of just a simple high and low because it makes it approachable. Like if someone were to come up to you off the street and say, "Hey, like, what are your feelings right now?" At least for me as a man, I'd be like, what are you talking about? Versus if I
Yeah.
met someone on the street and they're like, "Hey, high and low for today." I mean, it makes it a lot more approachable to then just lean into conversation and kind of meet them where they are versus feeling like I have to jump straight to 100% on the like deep connection level, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And if you're planning for it, you're watching out for it. Like if I wasn't ready and you asked me for my high and low, I might be like, yeah, I don't
Everything's
know.
fine. Yeah.
But if I know I'm doing that every night, now I'm kind of paying attention to how I am feeling throughout the day. So
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. All right. Next question for you. How can you tell the difference between a spouse that wants to help you become a better version of yourself versus feeling like they're trying to fix you?
I would, yeah, motive is everything, right?
Yeah.
I guess one of the markers for me would be the areas that they are, quote, trying to help me in, you know, do they benefit them?
Mm.
Or is it something that if I improve in this area, it does absolutely nothing for that? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is it self-serving?
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be like, question number one is, hey, the only thing they're really on me about is stuff that's ultimately going to benefit them more than me. And that would be one marker for me. I think another marker would be, are they willing to come alongside me and do the work? Or is it kind of like, whatever it is, and this is probably not the example, but, hey, I want you to get in shape,
Yeah.
you know, okay, are you going to come work out with me? Are you going to encourage me? Are you going to get up in the morning too? Or are you going to be, upset that I set my alarm early? So
Yeah.
I would say motive. Is this thing benefiting them more than it's benefiting you? And are they willing to be a part of the process and kind of walk with you? Would be two pretty good indicators of whether it's just fixing or it's actually wanting the best for the other person.
Yeah. And I mean, like, there's a huge relational equity piece in this too. This idea of, hey, if I'm constantly trying to ask you to do things and, hey, you need to change this, you need to be better in this, but you don't see that same like reflection in myself of trying to also improve myself. You can say, hey, like
Yeah.
you're asking me to do all these things, but I don't necessarily see that same like willingness or change in yourself. But then there's also like the trust element of saying like, hey, actually, like if I'm constantly pointing out things that you need to do better at, it kind of gets out of balance with like, okay, but what are the things that you love about me and are supporting me in, you know? And I could see a very quick path to someone feeling really questioned by their spouse if they're constantly saying like, hey, you need to go to the gym, or hey, you need to be better about reading your Bible, or all those things. And you're saying, okay, whoa, like there's all these different metrics or targets for me to hit. What if I didn't have those things, you know?
Yeah, the old 5-to-1 positive to negative ratio, right? Are
Yeah.
are we are we getting encouragement on this side, to offset all the criticism on the other side? So
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. All right, next question for you. How do you bring up sensitive topics without it blowing up into a whole thing? And loaded question here for sure.
yeah, yeah. So this part of this is going to bring us back to what I keep saying. I'm a firm believer. Every couple needs a consistent weekly check-in meeting. Period. I just think with where we are in marriage and life and busyness, and we need like you said, Sunday 7 p.m. is our weekly sit down. We call it a grow meeting. I have a whole template on kind of what goes on. But I think that is always the starting point. Are we doing it at the right time? Do I know, I'm walking into a place in a conversation where that is the expectation? We're going to talk about difficult things. It may be tense because I'm already better prepared for it than if you bring up a sensitive topic and, I'm trying to watch a football game, or I had a long day. So I think that, again, is always going to be my starting place. Do we have a regular time where this is expected? And then I think the second thing, especially with sensitive topics, is does a couple know how to express a desire instead of a criticism.
Mm.
And I think maybe John Gottman, I don't know who, I've read too many books at this point, but I think it's Gottman calls it transforming criticisms into wishes or desires. And
Yeah.
so instead of, you never give me a hug, right? That's a criticism. It's probably not going to be received as well as, hey, it'd be real meaningful for me if, when I came in the door from work, if you kind of stopped what you're doing and came and gave me a hug. And so expressing a desire instead of a criticism, I think will go a long way in bringing up sensitive topics without it blowing up.
Yeah, just reframing it a little bit so it doesn't feel as pointed. And I
Yeah.
love the idea of, if you're stepping into a sensitive topic in a time that you're not emotionally neutral or like in a safe level, like if you're already charged up, if it's the end of the day and you're tired, you had a long day at work, and then somebody drops a sensitive topic on you, the likelihood that that conversation is going to go really well is probably not that likely, right? And so
Yeah.
the idea of the regular touch point where you know that you're going to be in a place where things are steady and you're not tired, you're not exhausted, you've carved out this intentional time when you know that you can devote focus on your marriage, I think is really important. All right, next question for you. What are your thoughts in conflict on addressing multiple issues at once? For example, I bring up an issue and my spouse uses it as an opportunity to bring up their own issue. And this is also a common thing in conflict where people will bring up like one thing that's bothering them, and then they'll say, oh, by the way, you're also doing this and this and this and this. And next thing you know, your spouse isn't just hearing like one thing they did wrong, but like 48 different things that they did wrong. What are your thoughts on that question?
Yeah, my thoughts are no. Don't, yeah, right. Just don't. I mean, it's like the scenario you just gave. If you give me 17 things, that's overwhelming.
Yeah.
I'm probably not going to be able to respond in a good way. It sounded like some of that question was one spouse brings up a concern, and when they do, the other spouse is kind of like, oh, okay, if we're going to talk about this stuff, I got like 7 things I've been sitting on.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I mean, I always tell couples, if you made a choice to overlook those and not bring them up, so it's almost like you no longer get the opportunity to do it when your spouse finally brings things up, right? If it's a concern, you need to regularly bring it up. I think the other thing is we have a little saying that I pound all my marriage membership members on, literally probably at least twice a month we're talking about it. But the saying is this: validate now, truth later. Validate now, truth later. And so my belief is whoever brings a concern up to the other person first, their spouse's only job at that moment is to validate the concern that's been brought. Because we usually respond with our truth about the concern, and then it escalates, right? If my wife says, hey, I appreciate if you quit leaving the dishes in the sink and get them in the dishwasher. My truth may be she does the exact same thing. My truth may be I just picked up 4 of her dishes yesterday and didn't say anything, and now you're bringing this to me. But if I respond with any of that stuff, all I do is invalidate and dismiss her concern, and then we start escalating, right? So maybe it's not the dishes, but my truth is, well, you leave your clothes in the bathroom floor all the time. So now I'm bringing up the counter issues. And so that dynamic is, number one, common in just like every couple. We all do it. But 2, it's the one thing that prevents us from actually feeling heard, understood, and working on it. So my only job in that moment is to say, I hear you. I'll work on getting the dishes in the dishwasher.
Yeah.
Now, my truth's important, just not at that moment. So I need to come back maybe at a later time, or going back to what we've been talking about, if I already have a regular weekly check-in, I can wait till our next check-in, and then I can bring that back up and saying, hey, I heard you on Wednesday about the dishes. I'll work on that. But also, it's frustrating because I feel like you do the same thing and then kind of hold me to a different standard. So I just think don't bring up other stuff. When a concern's brought up, your only job is to validate the concern, whether you agree with it or not.
Yeah. And I almost empathize with a question because, I've probably earlier on in marriage, I was more in this bucket of not having a regular rhythm of checking in with your spouse. And so then when conflict does pop up, as a man, at least for me, I was like, oh, wait, I actually have things that I haven't thought about too. So let's use that as an opportunity, And so that's where that regular rhythm is so helpful, because it's not just like, hey, I can only squeeze things in during like these random sporadic times of conflict that we have. But we actually can have like a regular cadence of checking in and making sure everything's okay. And so I feel like I have the space to then air some of those things that I might be keeping in my back pocket or not necessarily expressing on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and it's easier, especially for the person, you get two spouses and one enjoys confrontation or problem solving or whatever they want to call it,
Yeah.
and the other one's non-confrontational. It becomes hard to kind of be like, I don't know when I don't want to ruin a perfectly, I like peace personally. I
Yeah.
don't want to ruin a perfectly good Tuesday night bringing up an issue. So then at some point you're like, I don't know when a good time is.
Mm-hmm.
And then when my spouse starts getting on me, I'm like, oh, now we're already into it. This is as good a time as ever. And then again, we invalidate and dismiss the concern by bringing our counter concerns. So
Yeah. And I think you bring up a good point of not wanting to ruin a Tuesday afternoon or a Tuesday night when you have like a small thing that's bothering you. And so then never addressing it. And I mean, that's where you lead to, you get 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks down the road, and all of a sudden you have this laundry list and you're dropping all of these things and saying, hey, you did this, you did this, you did this. And your spouse is probably sitting there thinking like, whoa, where did all of this stuff come from? And it was just for you a moment of convenience of saying, hey, I don't want to ruin this evening. But like we were saying, a regular touch point definitely addresses that for sure.
And you're probably not going to bring it up until it's so frustrating you have to bring it up.
Yeah.
And then now we get back to the emotions, and I'm probably not delivering it well. I'm not hearing, you got all kinds of other mess in the way. So.
Yeah. You're probably at the height of your emotion at that point of like, hey, this thing has been bothering me so much. I finally have to say something about it. So, yeah, that's a great point. All right. How can you make each other still feel loved in conflict? This is a really interesting question.
Yeah, but this for me is another one where I would love more context and another question back to the person. Like, what does feeling loved
look like? Yeah.
Look like? Because it may be for them that anything called conflict doesn't feel loving.
Yeah.
Right. For some people, depending on the home they grew up in, the fact that conflict is occurring feels unloving to me.
Yeah.
But I think some of this, we'll just answer generally, I guess. Some of this would be in the lead up to conflict. How are we loving and feeling loved? Right. That would be some of it. I'm gonna hear everything said in the midst of conflict through the filter of how have I been, quote, being loved on the way up, right? Do I like you? Do I feel good about our relationship? Because that's gonna, influence how I see everything. So I think some of it starts with, before we ever get into conflict, do we have a loving, caring environment? And conflict already feels better. But I think the obvious ones are just avoiding name calling, accusations, criticisms, universal statements, a lot of the just dumb mistakes we make when our emotions get going are not going to feel very loving in the midst of conflict. And so I think trying to avoid those. I think also how a couple kind of repairs after conflict is going to impact how we look back and experience the conflict. If I generally know that we do a pretty good job of kind of coming back and apologizing or hugging or repairing, that still feels loving, as opposed to if we get in a conflict, they're going to give me the silent treatment for the next day and a half. I'm probably not going to feel real loved in the conflict.
No, that makes complete sense. And I love that you touch on this point of, your relationship outside of conflict can kind of reflect how you're feeling in the midst of conflict. And so this idea of if you're feeling really uneasy or on edge or not safe in your relationship, it makes sense that conflict would feel really scary. And so one of the best things you can do is build that safety net of having that relational equity and feeling like, hey, I'm really loved and supported. We're having a lot of fun together. And so then in the moments of conflict, it doesn't feel so like dire, It's like, hey, we're actually in a good spot, in a healthy place in our relationship. And so we can enter into conflict in a way that doesn't feel so unhealthy.
Yeah. It's a little easier to talk nice to someone you kind of like, at the end of the day.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
All right, next question for you. What's the best way to start a conversation that you both know you need to have, but can tell that neither of you wants to initiate?
Here we go again, coming back to that weekly, do we have a rhythm of a specific time and place that we regularly do this? So I think that is going to be the starting point again. If you don't have a weekly relationship check-in, it becomes tougher. I think we can ask is a great way to start. Hey, when would be a good time for us to talk about fill in the blank issue?
Yeah.
Are you in a place where you feel good enough to have that conversation? Because again, I think a lot of times what happens with conflict is one spouse kind of ambushes the other. Sometimes unknowingly, but I also know couples who intentionally ambush the other because they don't really want their spouse to be able to mount a defense. They don't want them to prepare the counterattack.
I feel like it's their best opportunity to win the argument.
Exactly. I'm gonna come with shock and awe, and you won't have time to respond. So I think asking your spouse, hey, I know we need to talk about the budget, or we need to talk about this issue over here, when would be a good time where we could sit down and do that? So I think asking the question is a great start, but I'm always going to fall back on, if we already know we got a weekly meeting and this is what we go into it, and we let each other know, hey, here's, I know couples that share a note, share a Google Doc that they can kind of put on there, here's a couple things that I'm going to want to talk about at our weekly check-in. Then we already know, and we're prepared, and it's always going to go better, I think, when you're prepared for it.
Yeah, and I love the idea, you brought up the idea of the budget talk, and how that can be like something that neither of you are looking forward to, but just setting a time and saying like, hey, how does October 28th work for you to sit down and we can talk for a couple hours about what this looks like. And so that way you're both preparing for it, and it's not an ambush, but you have that space to mentally prepare and get to a place where you're ready to have the conversation for sure.
Yeah. So just trying to normalize it again. If you do it weekly, at some point it just becomes kind of part of who you guys are, and there's an expectation there, and it just gets easier and easier.
Yeah. Okay. This is another great question. You kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but what does healthy conflict look like? I grew up in a home where my mother always shut down rather than embrace conflict, and I am the same way. So for those people that maybe go into a little bit of a shell during conflict, what's some encouragement or advice for them in a situation where they're just feeling like they need to like go into a ball and kind of go into a corner somewhere?
Yeah, I think with somebody like that, they almost have to reframe how they see conflict. If you came from a home where a conflict was never good, you don't even really have a lens through which to view it as something good. I think reframing it to understand that conflict is actually the mechanism whereby we grow in understanding each other, where we get to know one another a little more. And so hopefully every conflict becomes an opportunity for more intimacy and more closeness. Again, if we're not doing it in an unhealthy way that causes damage, I think is definitely, for someone like this, going back to that regular time is going to help them. I think going back to really having the goal of validating one another. So when your spouse brings a concern, if your focus is trying to validate and really understand that and get curious about their concern instead of mounting your own defense and trying to tell them why that's not accurate, is going to help that. I think expressing desires like we talked about instead of criticisms, all of those things are going to set you up to have the best chance. Now, you still are never in control of somebody else's response, but if I think you express a desire before you express some criticism, if whatever they say, you do your best to validate it and understand it and let them know you're heard, we're stacking up more and more positives that have the potential of going well than we are ending up in a bad position.
Yeah. Now I can almost hear someone listening to this podcast thinking like, okay, I hear you saying validate, but what if I don't agree with them? And so they're like, hey, I want to validate, but I don't necessarily share the opinion or perspective that they have in that moment. What advice would you give to that person listening?
Yeah, you can validate even if you completely disagree with the person, right? Like my wife may say something to me like, that's so offensive. Whatever, you call me an idiot. That's so offensive. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm pretty 100% sure I did not call you that.
Yeah.
And I did not do that. And that was not my intention. But I can still validate, hey, if that's what you heard me say, I can see how painful that would be. And I'm sorry for that. Right? What's my win in not acknowledging and instead fighting her? And this is what most couples do, right? We get tied up in the minutia of, no, it was 3 times. No, it wasn't, it was 2 times. Okay, if you felt like it was 3 times, and I can validate those things. And so I think sometimes our fear in validation is we think that means complete endorsement of their perspective, and it doesn't. And again, we can come back and talk about how we experienced that situation at a later date, tomorrow, tonight, the next day, whatever, to come back and do that. And so, I think we can validate. I think another reason we don't want to validate is for fear that this person will then feel like they don't have any issues and we're the only one with issues. And so if I don't let them know that they're also in the wrong, which again is going to come back to me, do we have regular time? If I know I've got my weekly check-in, it makes it a lot easier for me to validate on a Wednesday, knowing I can revisit this conversation again on Sunday. I don't have to die on the hill today. And so some of it is, do we have regular times to talk? That helps me validate. But yeah, I don't have to agree with your point. Yeah. I can still validate how you're feeling based on your perception of what happened.
Yeah. And you mentioned couples getting lost in the minutia of saying like, oh, you said this 3 things or 4 things. No, I actually said 5 or 6, and kind of arguing over those small details when really what matters is what's going on beneath the surface there, and trying to get to the deeper understanding of like, okay, we don't have to get into the details of what I said or you said, but like, how did that make you feel, and how can I understand that,
Yeah. And again, if you validate another person, I promise you, they will be more interested in your truth when you do bring it, because they first felt heard, understood, and validated.
Yeah.
If they don't, they could care less what you have to say back. Like, your truth doesn't matter because you weren't willing to acknowledge mine.
Yeah. And I mean, if you're in a cycle of conflict and things are just amping up and getting heated and you're saying one thing and they're saying another thing, I can imagine the fusion that comes from just taking a pause and validating and saying, hey, I see what you're saying, and I can see how you would feel that way. And then just that immediately just takes all the tension just out, because it's not just like, hey, let me try to prove to you why I'm right, but like, hey, actually, I get it, and I see that, and I think that's great for sure. All right, next question for you. When having conflict triggered by tones or quick reactions, how do you have any methods to avoid impulse responses? So it sounds like maybe somebody might have said an offhand comment or had a quick reaction or said something in a way that probably wasn't the most uplifting. And then that kind of triggered into conflict. And then this person is worried about having more reactions in the moment when things are heated.
So basically, how do I not get triggered kind of thing?
Yeah.
That's you talk about a lot of, it depends is my answer. What is this? Is this a person who has a short fuse? Is this a person who's often triggered? If I mean, we don't have time to get psychodynamic on a podcast about questions, but where does some of this come from? I think normal stuff is just, are we aware of our own emotions and feelings, right? Do you feel it when the emotions start rising? Because I think that awareness will allow us to make better decisions. Like I can feel myself when I'm starting to get a little bit emotionally flooded, and we have to be willing to, time out. Hey, I'm feeling myself elevating here, and so let me time out. And whether that's, breathing exercises people tell you to do, to inhale for 3, out, exhale for 3, take a walk, listen to some music. So I think there are a number of things that we can do to calm down, but if we're not aware of it, you're done already.
Yeah.
Right. If I'm not aware of what triggers me, and then even, are we aware of what triggers each other? If you've been together long enough, there's probably some phrases
buttons. Yeah.
and words and that will trigger responses. So without having this person right in front of us to kind of understand, talk to me about the cycle you get. Like, what do you feel like does this elevation? I think we could probably find some specific off ramps.
Yeah.
But it starts with self. Yeah. If you're not willing to recognize when your emotions are starting to flood and you're not willing to bow out of the conversation, there's not a whole lot we can do at that point.
Yeah. And I mean, if you're at a point where the conflict is so emotionally charged where you're concerned that you're not going to be able to control your response